especially now that Thanksgiving is upon us. There's a lot of things that go through our minds and even through our hearts with emotions when we approach Thanksgiving. There's some fond memories that we have of growing up, of maybe going to grandma's house or our parents' home for Thanksgiving and spending time with family and friends. There's probably, unfortunately, some memories that aren't so fond. Maybe there was some drama that surrounded the Thanksgiving dinner table, and so you would rather not relive those or recount those. But also sometimes, we talk about Thanksgiving and the need for Thanksgiving. Why do we celebrate Thanksgiving? I mean, you know the answer to that, but play along. Why do we celebrate Thanksgiving? Not just to eat. Go ahead, Ransom. Football. Oh my gosh. Note to self: never call on a pastor's kid to answer a godly question. We celebrate Thanksgiving to give thanks, right? Right. That's a time for us to be intentional in gathering together to thank God for all the blessings that He's given us, to thank Him for the food, the friendships, the families that He's given us. And we have so much to be thankful for. As we just recognized our veterans, we have much to be thankful for them. We have much to be thankful for the freedom that we have. There's so much that we need to be thankful for, but there's a challenge, though, that though we know that as we approach Thanksgiving, we are to be thankful for everything. I'm just going to be honest here. There are times that I don't want to be thankful. There are times because I don't want to be thankful because, well, I'm focusing more on the things that I didn't receive or the things that I've prayed for, and those things didn't come to pass. And so what happens is because I don't want to give thanks to God, because now it has created this sense of doubt. I thought I knew who Jesus was, but because this didn't happen, well, it's kind of hard to give thanks for Him for all the other things, because I'm focused on the things that I'm not thankful for. Today we're going to be looking at a passage, and really it's throughout the Gospels. When I say the Gospels, I'm talking about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're the first four. It's called the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are the writers, the authors of these books, and they write an account of the life of Jesus, His miracles, His teachings, His death, His resurrection, and they all of them, all the gospel writers, talk about how there were several people who questioned who Jesus was. Now, we know some of those, some of Jesus' enemies. The Pharisees questioned who Jesus was. The Sadducees, all of these religious leaders questioned who Jesus was. And even just the common folks questioned who Jesus was, especially surrounding the crucifixion. I mean, after all, they're the ones that put Christ to death. But these individuals, you would expect, like the Pharisees and Sadducees, you would expect them to question who Jesus was. You would expect them, because they questioned who Jesus was, you would expect them to not express any kind of thanksgiving at all. You would expect them to be belligerent. You would expect them to doubt and have this feeling of disdain toward Him. What you wouldn't expect, however, would be the disciples of Jesus themselves. And this message really hits close to home, is what I was getting at earlier. This message really hits close to home because we too are disciples. And how many of us have reacted the way that these disciples reacted when they began to doubt who Jesus truly was? And so as we're in a season of Thanksgiving, I know many of us are struggling with this. And look, I get it. It's not that we're ungrateful for the things that we have received. It's not that we're ungrateful for our family or for our jobs or for our home. But we raise questions that start with something like, why doesn't Jesus? Or, why couldn't Jesus? Or, why didn't Jesus? Or even, where is Jesus? I want us to gain a perspective today that will allow us to have a happy Thanksgiving, in spite of all the things that we would identify as negative. But have you ever been there? Am I the only one? Have you ever been there finding yourself in a situation where Jesus doesn't respond the way you had hoped, and you actually doubt who He says He is? And so what happens is this generates all the kind of bad emotions, bitterness, angst. And these emotions are deeply buried with the seed of doubt that if Jesus is that, why doesn't he do this? Or maybe we feel that somehow he's let us down. We've prayed and he seems to have let us down. And so those disappointments cause us to either lurk in the shadows of following Jesus or even all out desert him altogether. So the question is, who is this man? That's the question we must ask ourselves, I think, if we are going to have a true happy Thanksgiving. Some of us are young followers. Some of us have been following Jesus for many years. And there have been circumstances that have risen in our lives that have brought heartbreak, disappointments, those unwelcomed surprises that have caused us to ask, really, who is this man? He didn't respond the way we thought. He didn't act the way we thought. And so we respond with doubt. We respond with fear. And sometimes we respond with disdain. So today we're looking at where, in a time in Jesus' earthly ministry, where Jesus is towards the end of his earthly life, and he's in an upper room, and he is celebrating a meal with his disciples. And the meal is something unique too, understanding the season that we're in of Thanksgiving. This meal is called the Passover. The Passover was a meal that the Jews celebrated. It was to recognize the deliverance that God, we studied this going through our Inseparable series. It was a meal to recognize how God delivered his people from Egyptian slavery. Do you remember that? And so they commemorated that event by celebrating this meal called the Passover. And we can get into the meaning of that. If you have questions more about that, I would love to discuss that. But they were celebrating their kind of Thanksgiving meal by recognizing God's deliverance and God's faithfulness. Now, in this meal, in the upper room where they were celebrating this very somber meal, it was a time to celebrate. It was a time to reflect. It was a time to remember God. But Jesus says some things that were very, not just discouraging, but troubling to the disciples. And it was words like, I'm going away, and where I'm going, you cannot come. Oh, by the way, the next one the one that I give the chalice to, who drinks from this, he's going to desert me and actually turn me in to the authorities, talking about Judas Iscariot. Oh, and I'm about to go to the cross. And Peter says, Master, you will not. What is this you're talking about? I will give my life for you. And Jesus says, well, actually, Peter, probably in the next 12 hours, you're going to deny me 3 times. And so you can imagine the troubled hearts that these disciples face. Probably everything else that they did throughout the rest of that evening as they were celebrating their form of Thanksgiving, probably was just, they were clueless because they were hanging on to Jesus. Now you have to understand, Jesus had been teaching, Jesus had been telling them that he's the Messiah. Jesus had been telling them that he was the resurrection and the life, that he is the bread of heaven, that he is the living water. They heard all these teachings about Jesus, and so that's why they dropped their nets and began to follow Jesus. Because they believed that Jesus was the Messiah. But something happened. A turn of events happened in that upper room. He began to say some things where they began to doubt or wonder, is he really who he says he is? So we pick it up. They leave the upper room, and it's night, it's dark. They're in the garden praying. And then finally, Judas Iscariot comes with the temple authorities, and they come with whips and clubs and rope because they are about to arrest Christ. And as this happens, as this drama unfolds, we see what in Matthew 26, verse 56, Jesus speaks and he says, but this is all happening to fulfill the words of the prophets as recorded in the scriptures. Now notice how the message reads. It says, then Jesus addressed the mob, what is this? Coming out after me with swords and clubs as if we were a dangerous criminal. Day after day, I have been sitting in the temple teaching, and you never so much as lifted a hand against me. You've done it this way to confirm and fulfill the prophetic writings. Notice this. Then all the disciples cut and ran. My translation says, and all the disciples deserted him and fled. But I like the way the Message reads that. Then all the disciples cut and ran. They cut their ties and ran. Deserted Christ.